Cool. Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. For our event, we're planning to talk to a couple of trans Olim, one Ola, to mark Transgender Day of Remembrance, which was technically yesterday, but it's always difficult doing things Motzei Shabbat, so we thought we'd postpone it till today. So I'd like to welcome Alex and Frankie, who very kindly offered to come and talk. Tell us about themselves and about their Aliyah process, about living in Israel, and also to talk about Transgender Day of Remembrance as well, what it means to them, and so on. Okay, so Alex, let's start with you. How are you doing?
Okay, well, hello everyone. I'm doing fine. I just finished teaching a nice 3-hour class, but I'm happy to have something to come back to after. So I know I'm still like my teacher voice is still on. So I'm like alone in my house shouting, but I can't turn it down. So I want to first welcome everyone and thank you all for being at this event. I think that having these events with LGBT Olim, it's really important for us to mark these anniversary days, especially for the trans community. And a lot of times, there are members of the community who make Aliyah and who may not integrate fully into a sense of community in Israel. And Roy, I really love the work that you do and love that you always keep these events going for us. It's really wonderful. And now I'll move on. Enough about Roy. I'll move on. And I'll say that just to give you some background information, my name is Alex Sanchez. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a teacher. I made Aliyah 3 years ago, and I teach high school, and I also am a college lecturer in Rishon. And I think that this is, kind of a really important event for us to mark and to remember. And we all experience transness, trans identity in different ways. And the world experiences us in different ways as trans people. And I think on this day, we really try to remember not just murder and not just these terrible things, well, some terrible things, but also the isolation that happens to a lot of trans people who are trying to navigate their lives. And I think for Olim, there's an added level of you're trying to navigate identity, then you may not feel part of the group that you move into or have issues, connecting to society. And one of the biggest issues that trans people face is this idea of not being welcomed in or invited into society to take part in work or education or going to school, going to class, going to your job. And sometimes that can be a really difficult thing to navigate and to carry. So I want to talk a little bit about my experiences as an educator and making Aliyah and what that has to do with this day. One of the difficult things I think when I was going through college, at the time I had not come out as being trans. I was living my 3 different lives at the time. And the difficult thing for me was I said to myself, they're never going to hire a transgender teacher. And they're not going to want someone like me working in the school. And this is years and years ago, before we had a lot of really great representation of trans people and great stories to look up to. This was, 10 years ago when really the future was not so bright for a lot of trans people. And when I went through college, I felt pressure not to come out because I felt like it would ruin my chances of being able to have a life and to pursue the life that I wanted. And this was an incredibly difficult thing to navigate as a young, in early 20s, late teens, because I felt like it was almost like in order for me to participate in society or in life, I had to give up who I was and I had to make that sacrifice. And for a lot of transgender people, this is what they experience. This is what we experience, not just in terms of getting a job or moving forward, but even living in our own home or going to our school or interacting with the people around us in our family. And this isolation leads to a lot of the, bullying, the harassment, the violence that transgender people experience. I think a lot of times we kind of have this issue where trans people are pushed as, you're not part of his community, you're not part of his, family, all of these different things. and we dehumanize trans people in our society. And recently, I feel like, yes, we've had wonderful progress, a few Netflix shows, a few, good role models to look up to, but that doesn't change the violence that happens on the day-to-day basis. And if you look, even last year, like, this is a sad thing to talk about, but it is a Trans Day of Remembrance. Last year was one of the record highs of trans people being murdered globally around the world. And the violence that the trans community experiences, it doesn't go away, even though we have these great representations. And as a transgender person and as a teacher, I joke that I have a do ask, do tell policy, that I'm very open about my identity, because I want people to know that, like, I'm capable of being my own person, working a job, doing the things that matter to me, and I deserve to do those things also. And I deserve to be able to go to work just like everyone else and be a part of society, be a part of my family. And a lot of trans people, when we keep hearing those messages of, no, you're not welcome, someone's been murdered because they're trans, you're not part of his family, you're not welcome into this school, you're not welcome into this job. When you hear those messages constantly, it's a really damning thing to carry with you. And I really do feel like, for a while, I was lost in the sense of I can't have my own future because of how other people feel. And this is something I think a lot of trans people who don't find acceptance in their home or their family have to carry for a long time. And I think one of the saving graces I always had was that I always felt a very fierce sense of independence. Like, I will go and do this and I will make it happen. But a lot of people don't feel that independence when they haven't had people to support them and to push them through these obstacles. And on this day, really on this day, I kind of think about, the largely transgender women who have been targeted for violence, murdered, or attacked. And I think about, like, how we could act as human beings to really do that to another person. But also, it's not just that act of violence, it's the continual acts of violence. It's the isolating individuals, boycotting individuals, refusing to allow them to be parts of our hearts and parts of our families. And so I hate to be so grim, but I really do think that, part of this day is recognizing that, whoever we are, it's our responsibility to treat other people with love and respect. And the differences come after that. And I wish that when I hear stories about people from my own city, because this year I witnessed this on social media, because now that I live in Israel, back in my home city of Trenton, a young transgender woman was murdered. And I think about, how someone, just a few years younger than me, is gone. And, her crime was being herself, being, an outsider, or being viewed as an outsider because of her identity. And I can't think of a reason why we would feel the need to kill someone for that reason. And so I really think, like, our role as, individuals in a community or society is to approach people with love and with respect. Maybe we don't understand their gender, their sexuality, their religious preference, any of these things, but we have a duty and an obligation to respect those people and to treat them like human beings. And I think that, with this holiday, I would hope that in the future, that's what we're able to see. Is not just, trans people succeeding, but also trans people being respected as parts of their community, as parts of their families. And I think that that's the work that still needs to happen. Roy, did I answer the question? I'm sorry.
Not at all, but never mind.
Okay.
No, thank you for that. That was really good. Yeah, I just wanted to ask you about just the basics, where you're from, when you made Aliyah.
Oh, okay. So I'm originally from Trenton, New Jersey, and I made Aliyah 3 years ago. Before I made Aliyah, I was living in Israel, doing Masa, doing volunteer work in Ramle. And so the Aliyah process, because I know that'll be your next question, Roy, the Aliyah process was not so challenging for me. But again, this comes from a sense of, independence that I have and self-advocacy that I have. And it's not the same for everyone. A lot of people, whether they're gay, trans, within the community, feel a lot of anxiety going to, let's say, a government official to say, I'm going to moved to this country, but you should know that my paperwork is not going to match who I am in front of you. There's going to be a different gender marker on this form or on this paper. And this is an anxiety that holds people back a lot in life. And I dealt with this as well when I made Aliyah, although I present every day as myself and I'm a very feminine and everything kind of person, my paperwork does not match that. And going through customs, going through security, I think at this point, I would hope the world is aware enough of transgender people, because I've never had a difficulty going through that kind of process. And in my own Aliyah process, I didn't encounter any obstacles. And I don't think that's the same experience for everyone. I think that that's because I hold a certain level of privilege, being someone who has a college education, who presents as sometimes a passable person, and there's a certain privilege that comes with that not everyone experiences. So for example, I think that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to help people navigate gender issues or gender topics. And I think that there's not there's a lot of discourse on this within Israel, but whether it reaches everyone, we don't always know. And I think a lot of times it's our work, unfortunately, to be our own self-advocates, because there's not many people who are going to step up and explain to, let's say, a customs official what a non-conforming gender is, or what a gender-neutral pronoun is. There's a lot of gaps in knowledge about our community, and sometimes it's very hard to navigate, let's say, going through an official channel and the person in front of you can't even recognize your gender or treat you in a language that would make you feel comfortable or seen in that moment. So I think everyone goes through a different experience depending on how they present to the world and who they are. But that's also part of a challenge. And I think that that's hopefully something that Israel's getting better with, at least in my view. In the last few years, I think there's been a lot of advocacy in Knesset and also a lot of advocacy in schools to be more aware of gender sexuality and how to talk to students or talk to people about these topics.
Lovely, thanks for that, Alex. I just wanted to move over to Frankie for a second. Can you tell us a little about your story? How did you make? When did you make Aliyah? Did you transition before or after? How was the whole process?
So my name is Frankie Levy. I'm 24. I made Aliyah in August of 2019, so a little over 2 years. I'm from the United States. I lived in Virginia up until I moved here for 22 years. And I can honestly say that my coming out of it, I haven't always been as I guess presentable as I'd like to be, as I see myself in my head versus how I present out, that I don't always am, I guess, out as trans. But that is something that, as kind of connecting as to what Alex had said about connecting to society and navigating and trying to figure out, for me is like, when is the time to tell people? Is it something that I want it to be said? Not that it's something that I want to hide, because it's definitely something that I don't want to hide. But it's also trying to navigate through society on when is the time to say, not to say, how to present. And I can say that through my growing up, it was sort of supported. My family has come a long way and are now supportive of me. And it was kind of something that, for me personally, it wasn't necessarily talked about as, I think oftentimes for me, is like people know you and they're aware of the situation, but no one talks about it. It's kind of like you talk around the bush. It's almost as you've uprooted the bush, but we still haven't named the bush. And that's kind of, it wasn't named of like, oh, he's trans, but it was known. And now as an adult, sort of an adult, young adult now, because I don't necessarily talk about it, others don't necessarily talk about it. And that's something that I can personally say that that's growth in trying to break barriers, as I've seen of others that I, other trans idols, I guess you could say, that I look up to, and as they've kind of breaking down these barriers, that I hope to kind of break down those barriers as well. And that is something of, speaking of connecting to society and trying to connect to myself, to others, that is something that for me personally, that Israel has encouraged with me, of kind of in the difference of cultures, as well as like environment of staying, how do I word this? It's like coming from abroad. It's like we have, losing my words, I'm sorry, having ways that our culture and how we go about ourselves and how we present ourselves within society, of how it impacts our daily lives. And I find that living here in Israel, that I find myself very comfortable here in Israel. I don't have family here. It's just me. I don't have necessarily people to kind of bounce off of. I've made friends here, and I do have a host family here, but of myself, it's just me. So to be able to build that backbone, and I find that Israel, though, in a sense, really encourages me to stay authentic and to be honest to myself and to express myself and I say in the way, like the Israeli way of, it's encouraged me to slowly come out more. I wasn't necessarily open of being trans before I made Aliyah. And actually the first year that I was here, in the first few months, I didn't tell anybody, I wouldn't say anything. And I started talking to more Israelis, and they're like, it's really important of being authentic, of even though that you've moved here and you've made Aliyah, is to be honest, but be you. Who are you inside? Be authentically you. And it really struck me that I was like, wow, this is really, it's like, I find that the Israeli culture really encourages, for me, to really be you. Who are you? And has encouraged me more to be open with my transness, because that is something that I grew up with, that I didn't necessarily talk about, because it was something that we all knew but wasn't talked about, that I was like, I'm not comfortable enough saying to myself, or comfortable enough being out. But in the time that I've been here, I've found myself becoming more confident and comfortable in my own skin, and knowing that, this is not something that I hide. This is not something that I want people, like, to not know, like, this is something important to me. And I'm happy of those who have have broken those barriers down, and I hope to break those barriers myself as I slowly. I'm still a young boy, but it's those that trying to move past. I don't know if I've answered
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
that properly.
I have a question for you regarding your host family. So how do you find a host family? How are you out to them? Do they,
I am, and it's actually funny of how I found the host family. So I'm in a program of Green Sabar, and so they had a opening to be able to find a host family, and I love them dearly. It's actually 2 moms, and they have 4 kids, and it was, I walked in there wearing my best Harry Potter shirt and button up, and I had my shirt. I was like, I'm repping my my Ravenclaw. This will be great. They'll love me. No. And I walked in, and I was like, so I just want to make sure that we're all clear, like we're all aware I'm trans. And they're like, yep, and we're lesbian. And I was like, very nice. Okay. And and it's something that we do talk about every now and then. That
How do I sign up to be in this house too?
It is. No, it's great. It's great. No, I mean, there are plenty of like social issues there, that I find myself now of, I can say that in the sense of being a late bloomer. I think now, like, as I found myself, like, for instance, in college, I wasn't out. I had just started hormones, and I was, I looked like a 12-year-old boy. So I was actually, for the first time in my life, mistaken as a woman, which wasn't necessarily what I wanted to hear. But there was a time there that I was kind of confused on where I was going, and I've just lost my train of thought as where I was going with that as well. Not funny, but where people are now, that I'm kind of late to the party, in a sense, that now as a 24-year-old man, I'm like catching up as to the time in college when I was 18, where everyone's like, woo! And I was going through a second puberty, in the sense that I'm like, I don't know what's happening. So now I'm late to this party that I'm telling them, I'm like, oh, well, I think this and I think this. And they're like, you're okay, just live. And it's really nice having that family here, and it's great too, as being in an LGBT community as well, is that there is that kind of I want to say the outsiders, but not the cis hetero knowledge of what's straightforward, what it would be of having those, I guess, hindsight views that, I don't know if I worded that correctly, that essentially helped me in the sense of becoming more of myself, of understanding of, everyone has their own path, in a sense. And I don't feel as that I'm as far behind as I feel that I am with my friends and with society and with community, as I'm trying to engage with other people that I feel that I'm behind, but I'm not. I hope not.
I know what you mean.
Can
I'm still reading.
Can I add on? Sorry, I just wanted to add on, and this is something that I didn't realize at first when I was transitioning, was that there's a period of time where you have to do almost like a social catch up, right? Because I feel like a lot of times, if you're not socialized in the gender that you are, and that you're presenting to the world, there is a feeling like I need to catch up on what I missed out from not being in this sphere of gender, and there is that little bit of feeling, and I kind of like what you said resonated with me, in the sense that it was an adjustment for how people would socialize me before I transitioned, and how people socialize with me after I transitioned. And it's an adjustment, because it's you're used to, regardless of how you are inside, you're used to the outside world socializing with you in a different way. And I think it's a kind of surprise, I think, when like a surprise roadblock, not roadblock, but like a road bump. Okay, English teacher. A road bump, like in transition, is that sometimes there's knowledges or things that we don't know, and then we're just kind of in shock, like the way that people socialize with us now that they see us as like the gender that we know we are. And that to me was kind of shocking, because it was completely different from what I was used to. So I wanted to affirm you in that.
I'm just reading from the fact you said you had to go through puberty twice. I mean, that just sounds like hell, absolute hell. Once was more than enough.
It was a time. It was a time to be alive.
So, Frankie, did you change all your paperwork before you made Aliyah, or was that something you did here?
I interestingly enough, as that my parents weren't necessarily 100% supportive at the beginning of it all. When I graduated high school, I came out socially, and then I started my physical transition a bit later. But my parents were actually the ones who immediately started and was saying, okay, we're gonna start with, finding doctors or hormones and stuff like that. And I was pretty impressed that I was like, I can't believe this is happening. I'm sorry, is this the same person that had the same conversation with me a month ago? But this is cool. And with that, I was able to get in with a lawyer and talk with that, which there were a few bumps in there. And I lived in the state of Virginia, and I know that there are other states that make it a lot harder for people trying to change their gender markers and going through the courts. And I can say that the courts are not necessarily the kindest place for people. And I was fortunate that I was able to get those passed. And in the notes of funness, it was of Purim of 2016, I believe. And I decided to go as Pinocchio so that I could express to people, I'm a real boy. And that was
Wonderful.
like the best part of it. But it was,
Nice
I was able to change those markers before I came here. But I can say that honestly, being here as well and finding doctors and finding people that are open, and as well, if there are still moments that I clench my teeth and hold my hands. And I'm like, okay, we're walking in there. We are doing whatever, medical business that needs to be done, even though I have all of my paperwork and I have everything that says that it needs to be said, and I'm open and I can talk to the doctor freely and I understand what happens. It's walking through those doors and, having anyone else that's kind of like, it's like, oh, thank you.
You not find it bizarre though sometimes where you go into those situations and you're expecting phobia, you're expecting negativity, you're expecting some kind of hate, and then it doesn't happen, and you're like, what just happened there? Why I prepared myself for all of that, and now you're saying it's all okay. It's like, do you find that ever, or is that just me?
No, I do. I actually had a previous time, which I found out actually before I moved to Israel. I had done a bunch of research trying to find recommendations of doctors that are trans friendly, that people knew. I was trying to reach out and make whatever connections with whomever I could. And they talked about in Ichlo that there's a whole area of on the 13th floor, I think it is, or whatever. It's all trans patients, and that, or a whole like trans section that doctors that see trans patients and stuff. And I had heard about it, and then I had gone, and I was expecting a little bit of maybe, I don't know, not that there would be like terrible backlash in the elevator up, but I was just expecting something to walk through the doors. That there's always, I feel, at least internally in my own head, discomfort walking in, say, to a women's clinic and knowing that I'm the only guy sitting in there, and it's what I need to do. I know that, everyone could just do their little to-do list, their task list, do what they need to do, get in, get out, and done. And that I walked in there, and I was surprisingly calm, and it was not an eerie quiet, but it was just, they actually did their to-do list. They did their thing. Everyone got in, got out, and it was done. And I had the first time an actual pleasant experience, nonetheless, that it was a hospital anyway, and people are running back and forth, and you're kind of like, ooh, I'm not trying to get run over by a gurney right now, but it was an actual kind of that was a nice experience. I appreciated that.
Wonderful. So when you were making Aliyah, so I'm assuming that they expected you to provide more paperwork. So they wanted to see evidence of transition, that kind of stuff to prove, because I know they're very, very careful, because there's been problems in the past where people have made Aliyah that shouldn't have, or whatever. So I know they're very, very careful about the whole procedure these days. And so was it difficult? Did you have to prove that you had transitioned before making Aliyah? I assume that when you got your ID card, it said male. Yes, so it matches whatever your paperwork matches from home. That's what you get in Israel. Yes.
Yes.
So was it difficult? Was it hard work getting all of that paperwork together, or?
It wasn't hard work getting it all together. It was hard work because I procrastinate everything. And I had all of my things together, all of the paperwork, and I had done all of the months prep. I didn't necessarily have too much difficulty of having proof. I knew that to begin with, because I was also trying to find a kibbutz to do Ulpan, and I was doing programming. So I knew going ahead that something is probably going to come up. So I figured, as much as I am not out to people, I was very upfront, and I had all of my paperwork in, if there's any previous counseling or doctors, or not going into too much detail, because it's bureaucracy. They don't need to know everything, but they need to know everything. So it's I was able to, without too much of a hardship, be able to get all of my paperwork together and send it through. That part wasn't necessarily the issue of the bureaucratic side of it. It was more of me getting off my bum and actually doing it.
Wonderful. And how did you find, so, I mean, both of you made Aliyah through Nefesh B'Nefesh, correct? Because you're both from the States. I mean, how were they? Were your Aliyah advisors helpful? Were they supportive? Were they, were there any problems in that respect?
I don't know if I necessarily told my advisor that I'm trans. I don't know if it necessarily just didn't come up in conversation, or I don't know if I mentioned it. I personally went on a charter plane, so it was like a party bus in the sky. So it was like I don't know. I didn't move with family, so like I said, so I kind of merged with whoever was there, but I didn't necessarily discuss being trans through that. What about you, Alex?
I'll say, so when I was making Aliyah, I didn't have any difficulties because I told them, this is my appointment. I need my citizenship by this day so that I can be enrolled into the Ministry of Education payroll system. Do not delay. So I did not have an issue with Nefesh B'Nefesh or Jewish Agency. Where I did have my issue was beforehand. And this is a kind of one of these mind-boggling situations where I was going to Misrad Haponim, and when I went, I won't say which branch it is, so no one sues me. When I went to this branch to get my visa renewed when I was here on my Masa, I had an expedited American passport because I had lost my passport because I'm irresponsible, had to get a temporary passport when I came to Israel. So when I had to renew my visa, I had an issue because the visa was for 6 months. My passport expired in 2 months. And this was probably 6 visits back and forth to Misrad Haponim, where they, in the end, told me the reason the American government did not give you a full passport is because they know that you're transgender and they're just waiting for you to figure out the right thing that you need to do. And I was looking at this woman, like, what are you talking about? And this was not like an entry-level employee, I'll say that. This is a woman who is supposed to be very well-versed in how documents, paperwork, everything works. And I think, in that moment of frustration, I was very annoyed with her and angry with her because I said, why are you just telling me things that are not true? And then like my teacher brain had to say, pull it back. And I had to say, she was wrong, but she was trying to be helpful. She was not succeeding and she was not doing her job, but she was not doing it for nefarious purposes. And this is an issue that I think a lot of times we as trans people experience, is that sometimes people's best intentions are not helpful to us at all. And instead of being able to, she didn't know the answer. And instead of being able to tell me, you need to renew your American passport and extend it for this amount of time, she gave me this story of like, maybe they're discriminating against you because you're transgender and they want you to figure things out before they give you a full passport. And at that point, I said, this woman can no longer help me because she is not able to do her job. And I need to move on to someone else who can help me in this situation. And when I went and I renewed my passport without an issue after explaining this entire dilemma to them. And it was one of those moments where I kind of had to say to myself, like, okay, was this discrimination? Was this like accidental ignorance? Was this a woman trying her best and just trying to find an answer? And I choose to just believe that she was trying to do her best. And I think a lot of times when we encounter misinformation, it can be one of these, really like daunting things as an immigrant or daunting things as a trans person to be bounced around to people who don't have the right answer for us. And I think that a lot of people in all aspects of life, whether it's in schools, whether it's in, government agency, anything, when you go through this kind of experience, it's almost like carrying an extra burden of like, why can I not just go renew my visa without like my gender being an issue in this situation, which it wasn't. And I think a lot of times, trans people encounter walls, and these walls are set up sometimes by ignorance and hatred. Sometimes they're just set up by people's best intentions, but not having the right answers. or they're set up because people have never had to interact with a transgender person knowingly, and don't have a gap in their own knowledge about these things. And so I definitely feel like that frustration in the moment. I was saying like, this would be easier if I just had like, my gender marker changed and all of these things done, but I didn't. And on the other side of it, then going through these processes can be really kind of draining. And going through these legal processes of changing names, changing gender markers, all of these things, I've been living my life for I've been out for 5-6 years, longer than that. I don't remember anymore. 5-6, let's say something like 5-6 years. And I didn't change my forms. And when I came to Israel, I couldn't change my forms without the approval of a gender committee. So in order for me to change my gender marker, what it requires for Israeli citizens, you must go through a gender change committee process, which is over a year long of a process of meeting with, it took like maybe like 6 months, 7 months, a meeting with doctors, meeting with psychologists, meeting with all these different people. And every single meeting went like this. Hello, I'm Alex Sanchez. I'm a transgender woman. I need the approval to say that I'm a transgender woman. And they said, yeah, you seem like you know what you're talking about. And they would sign my paper that I went and met with them. And while that seems like an easy task, the amount of frustration of taking off time from work, going across to different cities for approvals, meeting with doctors, meeting with this, meeting with that, it was such a laborious task that even now, months after this, my next thought was like, okay, I have the approval. Oh my God, I'm gonna have to go to Misrad Haponim, change my forms, get a new passport, change this, and it's a really daunting process. And it's an extra layers of work for people to do. If you're already going through life feeling like, oh my goodness, I don't have anyone to talk to, I don't have this, I don't have that, adding this layer of bureaucracy onto your life can be like a mountain to climb. And I don't have a solution. However, I'm just complaining. However, I do think that this like goes back into like what this day is about. And I think part of a day is not just remembering that people have been killed and murdered, but also remembering that people have really struggled, not only to like be themselves or come out or be with their family, but to live their life as a transgender person and to be able to go about their life in a way that recognizes them and go through these legal challenges and go through these processes. It takes a lot of work. And if you don't have support from your friends or community or people like this or government, it can be like a really big, factor in your own mental health and your own sense of well-being. And, Roy and I were talking earlier about the passing of a trans woman, Zahava, and there was a recent passing. And, talking about, sometimes the systems just continue to fail the people they're supposed to help. And sometimes when you're a transgender person, going through all of these processes, feeling like an outsider, having to go time after time, spending money on transportation, taking off time from work, not even being invited to get a job or, being able to get a job, this aspect of being trans can weigh down very heavily on individuals. And even if there are, great strides and great progress for the trans community in any country, there's still the aspect of like, life is not, it's still like not without challenges. And there's not always a framework to help people who are going through this process and going through these challenges.
Yeah, very true. Alex, I wanted to ask you, have you completed that process of changing your markers yet, or are you still mid-process?
I mean, I completed the process, but I'm not. I completed the process. I said to myself, I have to block out a period of time where I have the energy, time, and energy and time to be able to go to the government offices and do these things. And sometimes it's really as easy as going to the office, giving them a piece of paper and being done with it, which is what I need to do. But the idea of like trying to find the time to schedule it when I have work and other obligations, it can be a thing that you put on the back burner. And for me, like, I don't want to speak for every trans person. I can only speak for myself. It's not a priority for me. And it's not a priority for me because I know who I am. And because the times that I have experienced someone questioning me about my gender markers on legal forms, I feel very comfortable saying it because I'm a transgender woman. That's why my ID doesn't match my form. And I've never had an issue as a result of that. And I don't think anybody would be able to say anything to me to give me an issue about that. But I don't think that's the same for everyone. And it's personally not a priority for me. However, it is something that like I'm happy I did the approval, and now I can get it done when I'm able to put the effort into getting it done. But for me, I'm very comfortable in my skin and comfortable with, in my identity. And sometimes, like, yes, like it's a little, like shocking sometimes when, you're in a public place and people are looking at your forms and they're like, but it says a man, is this your husband? Like, why is it your form here? I said, baby, I don't have a husband. You're talking to the husband and the wife right now. So it's, like, so I mean, I feel at the level of my life where I'm able to, roll off things like this. However, for some people, this is a very big barrier, and it's a very, difficult thing to navigate. Being outed or clocked or whatever term you want to use in your day-to-day life. It can be a struggle. For me, it's not such a struggle or a priority. So, I'll get it done when I get it done.
Also, the other thing is that a lot of these conversations happen in an open space. If you're at the, if you're at the Interior Ministry, you're in a room with other people that are queuing and annoyed and bored and waiting to get dealt with. And if there's someone talking to you very, very loudly and saying inappropriate things to you, other people can hear, and it just adds to the anxiety that you just, you really don't want to be there in the first place.
The perfect example of this story, when you work as a teacher, which I do, when you have to work in a school, if you're male, you need to go to the police station and get a form that says you have not committed any of these types of crimes. And so my school said, listen, this is very awkward, we're sorry, but technically, because you're legally marked as male, you must go to the police station and present this form and get it signed by one of the police officers at the station. So I go to the police station in Rishon, and I go to the security desk and I say, I need this form signed. And he says, no, not for you. No, you don't need it. And I said, no, I need it. I need this form signed to go to my job. And so he was like, no, it's only for men. It's not for you. And I'm like, I have a surprise for you, officer. And so it was, it was kind of, thankfully it was only the entrance. And then I go to the security, to the back of the police station, and I sit with the police officer, and he's saying to me, okay, what are you here for today? And I said, oh, I need you to sign this form approval that I, don't have a criminal record or anything. And he takes it and he says, oh no, I can't sign this. And I said, what do you mean you can't sign it? And he said, I can't sign this if it's for your husband. He has to come and sign the form. And listen,
oh my God, how frustrating.
Listen, I took all of this as a very nice compliment.
I was going to say, at least they're gender affirming, right? Like the one place in Israel that they're being gender affirming is the police office. Like, okay. It's obnoxious, but.
Exactly.
That's just the bizarre thing that it is only a form for only men. It's like, Israel's just gone through this whole extradition process of a headmistress from Australia that escaped to Israel, and now she's been sent back to Australia for 72 alleged crimes against the girls that she was teaching, and this form in Israel is only for men.
Exactly.
Strange.
Wow. But I did get the signature of the police officer, and I'll add my joke, and I walked out with a few phone numbers too. But it was sorry, I have to bring some levity to the situation. But I think this is the thing. If you encounter a situation like this, and you are not so confident in being outed or being, discussing your identity with strangers, like it's a difficult thing to do. And, for someone who's, I think about this, like someone who has a difficult time being out or has a difficult time talking about their conversation, imagine having to go to a police station and sit in front of these police officers and say, I need you to sign this form, and have them question your gender and question who you are. I mean, it's not such a light thing for people to do. I make a joke of everything, but it's, it's for some people, it's not such a funny situation. I thought it was, but.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask you as well, I mean, yesterday was Transgender Day of Remembrance. In March every year, there's Transgender Day of Visibility. So I wanted to ask you both how you feel about these 2 days. Obviously, they're very different in approach. You know, today is marking the tragic deaths of trans people around the world. Transgender Day of Visibility. I mean, what does that mean to you?
Yeah.
I'll go.
Okay, Alex.
No, Roy, I'll go. So I think the part of me, I say, before anything, I'm Mexican, and when you're a Mexican, you always talk about life and death as part of the same coin. And it's hard for me to sit here on a day of remembrance and feel, like a heaviness or feel like a sadness or things like this, because I feel like in remembering death, we also remember the lives of, really, the people who have passed and who have gone away. And I still have my Day of the Dead altar over there. And so one of the things that I kind of think about is that, like, we've seen such horrible passing and such horrible death and murder and these horrible things happening around the world. But at the same time, like, I feel very inspired by the trans people I have in my life and the fierceness and the kind of like chutzpah to go through life as a person that you are. And it takes a lot to do that. And when we talk about Transgender Day of Remembrance, I kind of, for my community, I kind of think about like a lot of the violence that happens towards sex workers, especially Black and Latina sex workers. And that was like in my community who was often most impacted by this violence. And I think it's important that we don't try to paint like a picture that erases that. And I think it's, really, a really difficult thing to grapple with. And I think about like, if the people who passed just had a family member who would say, I support you for who you are. Or they had a school that said, no, like, stay in class, we'll defend you, we'll suspend those kids who bullied you. Or, a community that said, you're not going to beat this person up, they're a part of our community and we respect them. I think about how those little actions could have kept the lives that were lost. And I think a lot about, how, people who enact violence to transgender people and who really, target trans people with violence. I think about the loss of kind of like their own humanity of like, now at what point do you dehumanize someone to the point that they no longer matter to you and that they no longer are a life you have to respect? And so I think the difference between these 2 days is that on Transgender Day of Visibility, like it's not so much about, honoring the death, it's more about honoring the chutzpah of like going through life and being like, this is who I am. And if you have a problem with it, like, enjoy your life, Yeah.
Nice way of putting it. Yeah.
Good.
Frankie, do you want to say anything as well?
I honestly, I know of some of the trans people who have passed. I watch a lot of movies and TV shows, not necessarily of like recent, but there are a few stories that like in the States, but not of like past that I keep in the side of my head of. There's one movie in particular is Boys Don't Cry. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Hilary Swank.
Yeah.
I think actually got it like an award, whatnot. And that because I kind of for myself in putting in like in my in kind of in those shoes of kind of imagining that, and I personally, as Alex was saying about if those people in the school system had said, these people would get in trouble for these kind of things rather than having to go through and not finding the exact words that you said so well, of kind of maneuvering through the school system of that, of kind of imagining of not that something would like death or anything to happen, but it's kind of in the flip coin of it, of looking at the transgender visibility of kind of like, okay, I can say for me personally of, I guess, not saying this, as great as I have it in my head. But seeing of of these people who have died and of of the violence that have occurred is like, I don't want to take away from any of that, but it's kind of amazing of looking at me of like, oh shoot, like I'm really happy to be here, one, and two, it's just kind of to take from that, and I guess to, wow, my words are really not coming to me, and I'm so sorry for this, but to kind of learn, and the history repeats itself. So how can I help others in the future that, as something that I've been through, and I can maybe stop those who are also kind of going through that and hopefully don't end up dead, because that's not cool. And yeah, I'm sorry, I'm losing my words here, but I guess, yeah.
Paying it forward, basically, isn't it? That's what you're trying to say.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that. One last thing I should have asked earlier, actually. You both transitioned before you moved to Israel. I'm just wondering if you could tell us the process, or how difficult the process was of finding the doctors, getting the medication. Because again, I get messages from people that are making Aliyah in a variety of situations, and the advice I always give people is like, come to Israel with 2 or 3 months worth of medication, because it can take time to get the ball moving, what's the word? Yeah, the wheels rolling, whatever. Once things are started, then that's fine, but you need that buffer just to make sure that you have what you need before the bureaucracy happens here. Just wondering what processes you both needed to go through in order to get the meds that you were used to using, or whether they were available, or if you had any issues in that respect as well.
I went to my family doctor. I'm plugging my laptop in, sorry. I went to my family doctor in Ramle, and
lost your camera.
Yes, I'm just gonna plug in my laptop, sorry.
Okay,
and
sorry.
I went there and I told her, these are my medications. These are the doses. You're going to prescribe these to me and make sure that I have 3 months of a supply. And she said, well, I'm not a specialist in this. I don't know exactly how to prescribe this. And I said, well, you know what? A great thing. Here's a letter from my previous doctor detailing the doses that I need. And this is what I have to have. And at first she was a little bit hesitant, and she said, I really don't know if I should prescribe this. I mean, why do you need to take estrogen? Are you trying to become pregnant? And I said, this is the medication, prescribe it, thank you. And I was prescribed my correct medication. And I think it's a different process depending on how what point you are in your transition. If you have like a doctor's letter, to bring a doctor's letter, to bring medication for at least 2 months, because it may take some time. But also, like, it is kind of like a process of going through an endocrinologist. Thankfully, Roy, on the LGBT Olim website, there is a detailed section about what to do, just in case you're transitioning and making Aliyah and looking for medical advice, or not medical advice, but the medical process of how to be connected to the Sheba Trans Clinic, or to the other clinic in Haifa.
Yeah.
Okay. So there is some information on the LGBT Olim website, thankfully. And I think it's, part of it is, being your own self-advocate and making sure you have like the documentation of the medications you need when you make Aliyah.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Alex. Frankie, how was your experience with that?
I can say that I kind of helped that I was through counseling my entire life. So it kind of built up to it, as by the time that I was finding hormones, that I had the proof that of me talking about it, of so many years and years and years of I'm a boy, and this isn't something that I've just kind of trying to whip together. Because I know a lot of times, especially in bureaucracy, is that they want the back story, not just of like a few paperwork. They're like, no, the real, like, this is the real thing. But it did help to have years and years and years. So with that, then by the time I wanted to start with the hormones and whatnot, that I could just kind of flip that over. It did take a bit just to have the pharmacy to understand and to talk with my doctor to the pharmacy of saying, okay, I understand this is more than the amount that's going to be what's normally taken in a month, and trying to explain that, okay, it's for, 3 months time, which usually pharmacies are decent of like, they understand. You could just say that I'm traveling abroad. It doesn't have to be, they just kind of understand that. But even that, they were like, I'm not so certain. I'm like, please, I have, I'm shortening on my weeks and days. I'm like, I'm actually like leaving very soon. And how big a vial needs to be. And they, instead of giving one big 10 milliliter vial, they give you 10 1 milliliters. I'm like, that's like not helpful. So it was, and I will say, wasn't necessarily the smartest thing that I did, but I used a bit of like back and forth, which isn't super healthy. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this. It's all this like, so I take testosterone, so it's all like the same-ish testosterone, different brands, so it's like slightly off. But I was scared that I wouldn't have enough in Israel, so I started using again of my US stuff. And then when it's like I got the blood results and they're like, but this is this, and then we're using this, and they kind of went back and forth because I wasn't certain that I would have, and that caused a little bit of issues. That's not medically healthy. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. But other than getting over that, I guess, speed bump of making sure that there's enough, it wasn't too difficult to attain, since I had had years of counseling to kind of back up my words now. And I also had parental guidance, which now being here and I don't have parental guidance, I did find myself learning very quickly to actually read the blood results. And when the result, this is how adulting, I guess, works. When the results come back and you start having medical papers and you don't have your mom and dad there to help you, what do I sign here? And you have to do all that. I'm like, oh, this is crucial that I need to read this and understand it. So that I did have issues in the beginning trying to attain the right amount of testosterone and everything else. And there were doctors that were trying to say, kind of one way or the highway. And I wanted to have a conversation with that said doctor. And we'll just say it did not go very well. But with that, I can now kind of, I guess, hold my ground a bit more on trying to maneuver that medical side to those procedures, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I think one thing that Israel does teach you is to stand on your own 2 feet and to make you stand up for yourself, because there always seem to be people that are trying to push boundaries or tell you one thing and you know better. And yeah, it's definitely a learning experience. Very brave of you to do it at such a young age.
I wanted to say, I really like that this memorial event isn't just a candle lighting and a moving on. And I think that, sometimes, especially when we're talking about doing things for ourselves as a community, having a space to talk about like experiences and everything and have these conversations is a form of memorial, because like we have the advantage of being able to have this space. And I'm sorry, Roy, I'm pushing you off pushing off your schedule. And I'm saying I would really like if we could have some time like to talk or to have questions, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
I want everyone to feel like invited to say or speak or speak their truth or ask a question, because it's a rare opportunity, I think, to be able to find spaces like this where we can just be open to ask or answer or express what we need to express. So.
Absolutely, yeah. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to unmute yourselves, or if you want to type in the chat window or whatever you want to do. So yes, please open your mics if you have any questions. This is that scary bit where people don't.
I'll go.
Hi, Hannah.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for opening up and really sharing your stories and your experiences. I know it's something that I'm not exposed to on a day-to-day basis. So it's been really interesting and very educational. So thank you so much. And as for my question, I was just kind of wondering about how you feel in the trans Israeli community. Like, do you feel like you belong there? Have they accepted you? Do you have friends, like Israeli trans friends?
So thank you for the question. And yes, I it's a difficult question to answer because, you know, what anyone's, you know, Israeli community looks like, it is very, you know, up to where they are, who they are, like what they want out of a community. And at first, you know, when I first moved here, I felt very lucky that I had like the LGBT Olim community to like go to events and have like a queer community to go with. And I think, you know, when you talk about like entering a community, it's hard to like connect with people if you don't speak the language, if you don't have like friendships, of course, that are formed over years to interact with people. And I began to feel a little bit like an outsider because I had always felt very connected to my LGBT community back in New Jersey, where I was, you know, very involved in leading LGBT organizations and doing advocacy work. And then I came here and it was almost like, well, what happened to that sense that I always had of like, I have like a community to rely on. And I would say recently, my mindset has been like, it's very odd for me because I operate in a very heteronormative world. Like I'm a teacher, I work in a very conservative field. I work in a very heteronormative field. And being able to talk to other trans teachers has been what has been the most meaningful to me. And that has been my sense of community and kind of, you know, being able to reach out to other people who are working in the same field that I am. And when I first came to Israel to teach, there was a little brouhaha about like, oh, well, can trans people be in the school? Is it going to be a legal issue? Is it going to be this? Is there going to be a media sensation? Is whatever? And I just came and did my job. And I'm happy that I pushed the door open a little bit so that other people could just come in who are trans and just do their job. And that's what I feel very happy about, is now seeing that like I'm not alone in this conservative island of education, and that there are other trans people entering the Ministry of Education. And it makes my heart really happy to be able to like, you know, talk to them about it and you know, kind of like share my experiences with them. And I think for the most part, like the surprising thing that most people are like, wow, that's actually surprising, is that there is no issue for the most part of us going in and working and doing our jobs as teachers. I think people like our students recognize, our coworkers recognize that we're there to teach and we're there to do our job. And to me, that's my community. And my community has always been around educators. So that's where I feel my connection to.
Wonderful. It's amazing. I can say personally, for me, I don't necessarily have so much of a trans community of within like inner circle of inner friends. I mean, there is of course the Facebook group, and of course Corona happened, so I haven't necessarily met people in person. I am part of a group on WhatsApp of like trans soldiers, whatnot, but I've never formally met any of them in person. I am friends with some people that we chat here and there. But I think on kind of the day-to-day of who I see and who I speak to, if there are other trans people, they may not be upfront and out about it, and that I may not know specifically, but in most part, I'm kind of the only one at this point. I have recently connected with someone in the States, and we started talking a bit and asking questions on how, you know, Israel has been and integrating in, and she's hopefully going to move to Israel soon, and talking about our you know, trans history of our own kind of thing, and bouncing off of like, wow, this is amazing, oh my gosh. So I can say in the most, I mean, speaking of right here, right now, I mean, she's, I'd say of a trans acquaintance, a friend that I've made, but of the general pool of people, I spend a lot of time around the cis hetero folks. So not that that's an issue. It's just I don't have a lot of trans folk that are in my like inner circle or day-to-day lives that I can see. It's more of social media that I'm keeping up with the non gender conforming or the trans people that I like, oh, they're so cool, that I keep up with, but no one of that I speak or see to.
And I want to throw another thing out there, Hannah, also, is that one of the things that I kind of was like, you know, as I kind of like continued on with my transition. I don't know. As I got older, I don't know. One of these things that I kind of like think the big difference that I feel is that identity politics in the United States is so at the forefront of everyone's thinking. And my experience in Israel has really been kind of like the opposite, where I don't, even when I'm around like groups of like, cis normative everything people, I don't usually feel the need to disclose. I don't feel the need to like discuss my gender, but I feel free to do it. And for the most part, like kind of what Frankie said, like I interact with like cis hetero people all day long. Like most of my friends are cis hetero. And, I think that in the States, we kind of put ourselves into boxes and we're very comfortable socializing in our boxes. And at least in my experience in Israel, I don't feel that pressure to be in a box. And I think part of that thinking is why I don't seek out so much the community, because I feel like I'm a part of my teaching community. I'm a part of my school. I'm a part of my city. I, get invited to Shabbat dinners and to holidays and things like this. And I don't feel the need to like seek out like a safe place, because I feel like I can go about my life. And I feel like that's a unique thing about living in Israel. Maybe not true for everyone, but at least in my experiences.
I just have to say that I love how you said that. Like that really resonated within of seeing people and how you have your community, that it doesn't necessarily need to be seeked out and searched and been like, this is where I am. But it's, I really liked it. Well said.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you.
Excellent. Are there any other questions? I was going to say, I plan on uploading a video to the website, but if I can obviously, if there are any questions that you want off the recording, then that's fine as well. Please let me know. But if you have any other questions, feel free to either ask in the chat window or unmute yourselves. No. Okay. No problem. All right. So I just wanted to thank you both for participating in today's session, and for everyone who joined us as well. So it's so lovely to see you all here. Yeah, so I hope to do more of these in the future for other days around the year. Earlier in the year, or last year was it? I can't even remember now. We did one for Family Day, and I think last December we also did a session for World AIDS Day on the 1st of December. So if there are any others that other people would like to see, then please let me know, because I'm not always completely up on the full calendar. All right, so thank you very much everyone for attending, and it's really nice to get to know both of you better, and hope to see you soon.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thank you both, and thank you, Roy, for putting it together.
Thank you,
No
Roy.
worries.
Thank you.
Shush, stop it. Thank you very much. Good night, everyone.